The courthouse plaza was quiet that morning, a chill wind sweeping through marble pillars and echoing across the empty steps. A black woman in her mid-30s walked calmly toward the main entrance, her stride purposeful, her face composed beneath a charcoal gray hat. She carried a leather briefcase, polished but worn from years of use, a symbol of someone who had earned every inch of respect the hard way. But respect was the last thing she received that day. Before she could reach the doors, two uniformed officers stepped in front of her, their hands resting casually but firmly on their holsters. "Ma'am, this area is restricted," one said, his tone laced with suspicion rather than courtesy. She opened her mouth to explain, but the second officer had already grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back. The briefcase fell, papers scattering across the courthouse steps like fragments of dignity. Pedestrians stopped. Phones rose. Someone laughed. She kept her voice steady, measured, even as the cold metal cuffs clicked shut. "Please," she whispered, "there's been a mistake." But the officers didn't hear her, or chose not to. They dragged her toward the patrol car, faces hard, judgment already rendered. And just as she looked back at the courthouse, her eyes met the bronze plaque beside the door, the one engraved with her own name. Han Judge Naomi Carter. The metallic slam of the police cruiser's door echoed through the morning air, a sound that usually marked guilt, not grace. Inside the car, Judge Naomi Carter sat still, her wrists pressed against the cold cuffs that bit gently into her skin. The uniformed officer in the driver's seat avoided her eyes, pretending to fill out a form. The younger one, sitting beside her, kept glancing into the rearview mirror, his jaw tight, as if silently trying to convince himself that he'd done the right thing. Outside, the courthouse loomed, tall, pale, indifferent. Naomi had walked those marble halls for 7 years, sentencing criminals, granting bail, and upholding justice with a balance only a few could maintain. And now she was watching those same halls drift away behind the smudged glass of a police car. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. She had seen what shouting did. It turned dignity into entertainment. Her thoughts drifted backward. To that first day she'd stood in front of the state bar committee, answering questions that weren't about law, but about her skin. Questions about diversity representation disguised as politeness, about temperament, about community fit. She'd smiled through it all, because smiling was survival. The car stopped behind the courthouse. "Processing first," one of the officers said curtly, opening her door. The other stood by, adjusting his belt, watching her every move like a threat waiting to happen. "Sir," she began calmly, "you're making a serious—" "Ma'am, you can explain inside," he interrupted. They led her through the back entrance, the one used for detainees. It was a narrow corridor with gray concrete walls and flickering fluorescent lights. The irony didn't escape her. She'd sent dozens through this same hallway, yet never imagined she'd see it from this side. Inside the holding room, a clerk looked up in surprise. "Another one?" he muttered. "What's the charge?" The older officer shrugged. "Trespassing, maybe obstruction. She was resisting access to a restricted area." The clerk raised an eyebrow. "That's the main courthouse entrance." "Yeah," the younger officer replied. "She said she worked here." The clerk frowned and turned toward Naomi. "Name?" She hesitated, not out of fear but choice. Names carry power, and in that moment she wanted them to feel the weight of theirs before she spoke hers. "Naomi Carter," she said softly. The clerk froze mid-typing. His eyes darted to the nameplate beside the computer, a small photo of the courthouse judges panel. And there she was, standing in the front row, robed in black, the youngest judge in county history. He looked back up, pale. You're Judge Carter?" The older officer scoffed. "Right, and I'm the governor." But the clerk was already standing, his fingers trembling. "Sir, she's telling the truth." The air thickened. Even the hum of the lights seemed to quiet down. The older officer blinked, his confidence faltering as the realization began to crack through the surface of arrogance. Naomi met his eyes. Calm. Controlled. But in her silence, there was a storm, a lifetime of proving herself, of walking into rooms where she was always the first, always the exception. The officer's voice softened. "Ma'am, Judge Carter, we didn't what?" She interrupted, her tone precise as a gavel strike. "Didn't think I could belong in this building?" Neither man answered. She lifted her cuffed wrists. "You can take these off now," and for the first time that morning, the one giving the orders wasn't wearing a badge, but authority radiated from her anyway. The sharp click of the handcuffs unlocking echoed louder than anyone expected. The officers' eyes darted between each other, each silently urging the other to fix what had been broken. But some mistakes echo long after the sound fades. Naomi rubbed her wrists slowly, her touch calm, deliberate, as if reclaiming ownership of her own body after an unlawful trespass. She didn't speak. Silence, she knew, could weigh heavier than rage. The two officers fumbled for words, but none came. The clerk's gaze dropped to the floor, realizing that in the rush to assume, they had stripped dignity from someone whose entire life was built on protecting it. Naomi adjusted her coat and straightened her hat. "Escort me," she said finally, her tone measured, the kind of calm that makes men nervous. Back through the front entrance, the order landed with quiet authority. No shouting, no anger, and just precision. And it worked. They followed her lead now, not out of obedience to a badge, but to the undeniable weight of what they had done. As she walked, the courthouse corridors seemed to grow silent. The clerks who had seen her name on every ruling now saw her return not as a judge, but as a survivor of their own assumptions. When she entered the main lobby, conversations paused. People who had witnessed her being dragged away stood frozen. The same crowd now staring at her walking back in. Unbroken, composed. The air carried a mixture of shock and shame. At the security desk, the same officer who had ignored her earlier was now fumbling to salute. Judge Carter, She raised a hand gently. "Save it," she said, not unkindly. "Just do better next time." As she made her way up the marble staircase, every step carried the rhythm of quiet justice, not the kind delivered by gavel, but by grace. In her chambers, her assistant Lila rushed in, flustered and pale. "Judge, I tried to tell them you were running late, but they said a woman matching your description." Naomi placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "It's all right, Lila, I'm here now. Let's begin the session." But inside, she wasn't all right. The humiliation clung to her skin like cold rain. Years of struggle condensed into one public moment of degradation, a reminder that no title, no education, no position could insulate her from the reflexes of prejudice. Minutes later, the bailiff announced the morning session. The courtroom filled. Lawyers, defendants, and journalists took their places, unaware of the morning's chaos outside. Naomi entered through the side door in full judicial robes. The same officers from earlier stood at the back, waiting for orders they weren't sure would ever come. "All rise," the bailiff declared. Everyone stood, even those who had once watched her be handcuffed. Naomi took her seat behind the bench. "Court is now in session," she said calmly. Her voice carried no tremor, only authority. The gavel struck once, a sound that meant far more than procedure. The case before her was an assault charge involving a young black teenager accused of resisting arrest. The irony wasn't lost on her. The officer in that case, the same precinct that had just dragged her out of her own court. The prosecution spoke first, painting the boy as aggressive and non-compliant, words she'd heard countless times before, words used to justify bruises, arrests, and bullets. Naomi listened carefully, her expression unreadable. But every word struck deeper, every phrase reminding her how systemic prejudice masquerades as professionalism. When the defense took the floor, the mother of the boy began to weep quietly in the back row, a sound Naomi couldn't ignore. It was the same sound her own mother made decades ago when police raided their house over a mistaken warrant. Different city, same story. As evidence was presented, something in Naomi shifted. The earlier humiliation wasn't just a personal insult, it was proof. Proof that the very institution she served could still turn against her in a heartbeat. By the end of the session, her verdict came like truth itself, cold, precise, and undeniable. This court finds that the defendant was subjected to unnecessary force, provocation, and misconduct. "Case dismissed," the courtroom gasped. The mother sobbed louder. The officers in the back lowered their heads. Naomi stood, looking directly at them, not with vengeance, but with vision. "Justice," she said softly, "doesn't belong to uniforms or titles. It belongs to truth," and though her words were measured, the silence that followed was absolute. The kind of silence that marks the beginning of change. The sound of the gavel still lingered in the air long after Naomi left the bench. It wasn't just the echo of wood striking wood, it was the echo of reckoning. Every word, every decision she made that morning had shattered the silent arrogance that had wrapped itself around that courthouse for years. But outside those marble walls, the story had already escaped. By noon, the courthouse plaza swarmed with cameras and reporters. Someone had filmed everything, from the moment she was handcuffed to the second she walked back inside as the presiding judge. The clip had gone viral within hours, tearing across social media like a lightning storm. Judge Carter was trending. Black judge wrongfully detained by police, outside her own court. Justice in handcuffs when the system targets its own. Headlines blazed across news tickers. Commentators dissected her calmness, her restraint, her dignity in the face of humiliation. But not everyone was praising her. Some questioned the context, some defended the officers. The usual polarization erupted, the country splitting down its familiar lines of race, power, and denial. Naomi watched it unfold quietly from her office. Her assistant Lila scrolled through the screen, disbelief on her face. "Judge, this is everywhere." The governor's office called. "The state attorney wants a statement. Even CNN requested an interview." Naomi said nothing. She stood by the tall window overlooking the plaza, the same one where she had been dragged only hours ago. Down below, a crowd was gathering. Protesters held up signs. "Dignity isn't a privilege, and if even she's not safe, who is?" Her pulse was steady, but her heart ached. She didn't want fame. She wanted fairness. And yet the world only listened when injustice went viral. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. The same two officers entered, hats off, faces pale, escorted by the chief of police. The chief, a man with graying hair and a heavy sense of damage control, spoke first. "Judge Carter," he began, his voice careful, rehearsed. "We want to extend our deepest apologies. The officers involved have been placed on immediate suspension pending investigation." Naomi turned from the window. Her gaze was calm but piercing. "Suspension?" she asked. "Not accountability?" The chief hesitated. "We'll conduct a full internal review." She stepped closer. "Internal reviews don't fix broken perspectives, Chief. They just hide them until the next time." The words landed heavy. The officer's eyes stayed fixed on the floor. "You didn't just cuff a woman," she continued, voice steady. "You cuffed a symbol of what every black person fears in this system. That no matter how hard we work, how high we rise, we'll still be dragged down by the assumptions of others." No one moved. No one dared to respond. She sighed, the exhaustion visible now. "You want to apologize? Then don't do it to me. Do it publicly. Let the city see accountability, not secrecy." The chief nodded slowly. "We will, Judge. We will." After they left, Naomi sank into her chair. The weight of the day pressed down, heavier than any sentence she'd ever given. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from her mother. "Baby, I saw the video. You didn't even raise your voice. That's my girl." Naomi smiled faintly through the tears that had been waiting all day. Her mother's pride meant more than any headline, more than any official apology. By evening, the courthouse steps had transformed into a rally. People from every background gathered, lawyers, students, activists, even strangers who had once ignored stories like this. Naomi watched from the top steps as cameras flashed below. Reporters shouted her name, asking for a statement. She lifted her hand, silencing them. "What happened to me today," she said, her voice strong and clear, "is not just my story. It's a reflection of what happens when bias wears a badge, when judgment walks before truth, when dignity becomes negotiable. The crowd quieted. Even the air seemed to still. I stood before this court as a judge, but this morning I stood before it as a black woman denied her humanity. And if I, with all my privilege and position, can be treated like that, then imagine what happens to those who have neither. Applause erupted, tears mixed with chants. Someone began to shout, "Justice for Judge Carter!" But she stopped them gently. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Justice isn't for me. Justice is through me, for everyone who never gets the chance to prove they deserve it." The words burned into the air, unforgettable. Behind her, the bronze plaque with her name gleamed faintly in the setting sun. For years, it had been just a title, but tonight, it meant something else entirely. The cheers from the crowd faded into the soft hum of night. Streetlights flickered on around the courthouse steps, bathing the crowd in a warm, amber glow. Naomi stood still for a long moment, her gaze sweeping over the faces, young, old, black, white, all standing together not in pity, but in solidarity. For once, the steps of justice looked like they belonged to everyone. When the crowd finally dispersed, Naomi descended the stairs alone. The air was cool now, quiet. A light drizzle began to fall, gentle, cleansing, as if the city itself was exhaling. She tilted her head back, eyes closed, letting the rain wash away the dust of the day, the humiliation, the hurt. Back inside the courthouse, the janitor, an older black man she'd known for years, stood waiting with a mop in hand. "Judge Carter," he said softly, "you made them see what we've all been feeling." Naomi smiled faintly. "Sometimes it takes a storm to show what needs rebuilding," he nodded. "You built more than you broke today, ma'am." She walked past the courtroom one last time before heading home. The seats were empty now, but echoes of the morning lingered. The scuffle, the gasps, the silence. She placed her hand on the judge's bench, feeling the smooth wood beneath her fingertips. It had always represented power to her, but tonight it symbolized purpose. The following days unfolded like ripples spreading from a single stone. The city mayor issued a public apology. The chief of police held a press conference beside Naomi, acknowledging systemic failures in officer training and bias awareness. 2 officers resigned. One issued a handwritten apology that simply read, "I saw your skin before I saw your name. I'll regret that forever." News outlets called it the Carter incident, but Naomi refused to let it be defined by her pain. She turned it into progress. Within weeks, she launched a judicial initiative, the Bias Bench Program, designed to train courthouse staff and officers on racial sensitivity and the hidden language of power. It became mandatory statewide by the end of the year, and slowly, people began to see her not as a victim, but as a visionary. Universities invited her to speak. Civil rights groups quoted her speech from that night. Even the same officers who once avoided her courtroom requested to sit in her sessions, not out of obligation, but respect. Yet Naomi remained grounded. Each morning, she still took the same route to the courthouse, past the same marble steps where it all began. But now, every time she climbed them, a small crowd of students or community members gathered just to watch her walk in. For them, she had become a living reminder that dignity doesn't need permission. One morning, as she approached the courthouse, a little black girl standing with her mother tugged at her sleeve. "Are you the judge they arrested?" the girl asked innocently. Naomi knelt down, smiling softly. "Yes, sweetheart. But they didn't just arrest me. They woke me up." The girl's mother looked emotional. "You woke us up too," she whispered. Months later, Naomi sat alone in her chambers after court had adjourned. The city had changed, little by little. Officers were now required to attend empathy training. The courthouse installed portraits of trailblazing black judges in the main hallway, her picture among them. She leaned back in her chair, looking out the window. The bronze plaque outside still caught the sunlight each afternoon, her name etched in metal. But it was the reflection that mattered more now. For years, she had seen that plaque as proof that she'd made it. Now, it was a promise that she'd make it better. Her phone buzzed again, a message from her mother. You turned a moment of humiliation into a lifetime of healing. I'm proud of you, my judge, Naomi smiled. Outside, the courthouse bells began to toll, slow, resonant, deliberate. Each sound carried through the city, bouncing off glass towers and cobblestone streets, a reminder that justice doesn't end in rulings. It lives in courage, she whispered to herself, almost like a prayer. They dragged me out in handcuffs, but I walked back in as truth. The room fell silent. Only the echo of rain remained against the window, soft, rhythmic, eternal, and somewhere in that quiet rhythm, a new kind of justice was being written, not in law books, but in hearts, final message on screen for video ending. True justice isn't about who wears the robe. It's about who dares to stand for what's right. Inspired by real events,